Follow us to stay updated on debates, discussions, facts, and tips about health. Click on the subscribe button and the bell icon for latest updates.
Hello, everyone. Today we have Mary Barua with us, who has devoted her life to championing the rights of autistic individuals worldwide. She is a driving force behind Action for Autism, an organization that stands at the forefront of creating awareness and fostering understanding about autism. Notably, Action for Autism has spearheaded the establishment of the Center for Autism, a distinctive school in India designed to cater specifically to the unique needs of autistic children. Her work in the field led the government to include autism in the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. Mary Barua's visionary leadership continues to transform the landscape of autism support, leaving an indelible mark on countless lives. Let's talk to her to get more insights on the subject. A very warm welcome to you, and thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you, Shailaja, for having me. By the way, the organization, while it is the National Center for Autism, it's largely known as Action for Autism.
Action for Autism. Okay, sure, ma'am. So, ma'am, my first question to you is that how has the landscape of autism awareness and acceptance in India evolved since you began your journey, and what challenges remain?
Excuse me. Okay, has it evolved? There has been significant changes in the way things were earlier. And that would be in the sense that there is much greater awareness of the existence of autism, because when we had started, it was not known to exist, and if at all, even professionals used to think that this is something that only happens in Western countries. This is not something that happens in India. So I would say that is one very big shift. The acknowledgement that autistic people exist as much in India as they do anywhere else in the world. That is a very big change. The other things that have happened is that there is the possibility of diagnosis that has gone up. It is not as much as it should be, but it definitely is happening much more now. Of course, it is more in urban areas and in larger towns. In smaller towns, it is still not. It doesn't really happen as much, right? That awareness is still not as much there for diagnosis. In addition, in the sense that people do not recognize that somebody may be autistic, even if they're seeing them, which is why the diagnosis is not happening. Some of the major changes that have happened are policy related. So, as a result of the Right to Education Act, which the disability community fought to have disabled people included in amongst the marginalized groups, which happened in 2012 eventually. As far as government schools are concerned, you have to admit autistic students. And actually, even in private schools, you have to admit students with autism, right? There is a quota for that. It's a different matter that it does not happen, that schools do not want to invest in understanding how to support autistic or other disabled population, but that the law is there. So hopefully that will bring about change. It is bringing about change because there are schools that are a more, what should I say, have a more inclusive mindset, that are really making an effort, and they can lead the way for others. So that's been the other change. But I would say the biggest change that has happened is for a long time, autistic people were only understood from the perspective of non-autistic people, what we call neurotypical people. The understanding was totally driven from the understanding of those who don't have autism. So obviously, we saw them as, from a very deficit-oriented perspective, that they can't do this and they can't do that, because we were not really understanding their experiences. Now, because of an increase in the number of autistic people who are speaking for themselves, as has happened with the blind community or the deaf community or the a wheelchair using community, they are speaking for themselves, right? So it changes perceptions. And that is beginning to happen with the autistic community in India. They are beginning to speak for themselves so that our understanding, I know that as an organization, when we started, we, from the word go, we believed that we have to be non-judgmental of autistic people, and others were different. So we started with that perspective. That was our driving principle. But despite that, we didn't really understand their experiences. For instance, the general perception is that, oh, they do not understand how other people's minds work. But they do. They do understand how the minds of other autistic people work. And they do not understand how the minds of neurotypical people work. Exactly the same way as neurotypical people understand how other neurotypical minds work, but they do not understand autistic minds, right? So, that shift has happened as an organization. We are still working on it. We are not there, but we are, that many organizations, at least a few organizations, I won't say many, a few organizations are trying to take on a more neurodiversity affirming perspective in supporting autistic people. So I would say these are some of the biggest changes. Oh, yeah, one other thing is that um, while earlier also there were autistic people in the workforce who were kind of coping and managing and trying to cover their challenges, because if the challenges got known, people are not particularly kind, right, of somebody who's different, but who were coping. But now there are people who are very obviously autistic who are getting a place in employment because some companies are beginning to open up to having autistic people on their um, team. So that's the other thing. But I think the neurodiversity affirming perspective is one of the biggest changes that has happened. It still has to spread. It's still at a very, it's like a seed right now. It has to, move to spreading a lot more, but that has started.
Okay. Since you mentioned about schools, so my second question is slightly related to that, which is what kind of support system, what does India lack as a support ecosystem for parents of an autistic child?
What India currently lacks in terms of schooling is really attitude, right? And it's not just to do with autistic people, it's to do with any disability. It's to do with attitude. Um, the thing is that um, we are people who see people with disability, whether it's autism or any other disability. We are a minority in a majority community, right? And it is the majority that has to make place for us. It's the majority that has to accept that these are people who have as much right to an education and to a life and to recreation, right, as they do. We don't have a very, um, how should I say, a very inclusive mindset. I mean, we say we do, we did, but we don't anymore, right? And it's not that the whole world is like that. There are many countries where the mindset is still very, very inclusive, right? So we are very, what's the word I want? Judgmental of anybody who's different in any way. Somebody living in Delhi, I know when I moved here 30 years back, anybody from the Northeast was looked at as, these weirdos. They still are, right? Because they simply have a different culture, right? And disability is also a different culture. So the problem in schooling comes from this unwillingness to make changes. So attitude is the most important. The other one is the way we teach. Because, ultimately it is school that fashions how the academic thing will go in higher education, right? So it's the teaching methods. We have the NEP, for instance. It has wonderful suggestions for all of us to follow. Do we really follow them? Even before the NEP, the earlier national policy on the policy on education that we had, it talked about making learning, more experiential. Do we really do that? How many schools? I know that most schools just open a book, or nowadays they often open a smart board and they go through the text, and that's it. There is no doing. And especially in the early years, especially in the early years, if you are not teaching children how to learn by doing, that is why we are nowadays churning out people who are not really very good at a lot of things. We keep talking about people who've gone to IIT and to overseas and done this and done that. They have mostly done it on their own. They've gone to these, coaching classes, they've got into IITs, they've managed on their own. And then once in the IIT, maybe they're teaching them well. But the ones that are getting in, it's not because the school has done a great job. If you are teaching children numbers and you just do dots in the paper and you say, okay, you don't take them out and say, okay, let's collect these leaves and put them there, count the leaves before you put them in. Put 1 spoon in 1 cup. There are 6 cups here, put one spoon in each cup. If you're not actually doing, why do you think most Indians hate math, or most people in many places hate math? Because it's not taught the right way. Because math is something we use in life all the time. We are constantly calculating, adding, putting in, whether it is in a home, whether it is in the kitchen, whether we are shopping, right? We use math all the time, but people hate it because the way we teach. So if students with autism were taught the right way, they would learn. The thing with autism is they need a very concrete way of learning, right? And just mugging it up, they're great at mugging up. They're fabulous memories, right? They will mug up, but that mugging up will help them till a certain class. After that, it doesn't work. You have to have the understanding. And whereas for a lot of us who are not autistic, we have not been helped to understand the concepts when we are young, but because our minds are not as literal, the penny eventually drops. For a lot of autistic people, the early learning has to be very concretized, very direct, right? And if you do that, all children, even blind students in your class will learn if you make it very concrete, right? Even kids who have learning disability will learn. But that we don't have that because, really, education is now a business. Earlier, people started schools out of passion. Now we start schools to make money. And we would rather spend a lot on air conditioning and fancy classrooms. I'm not saying have bad classrooms, but you don't need to have air conditioning in every classroom and every space in the school. And that is what we want to spend on rather than spending on enabling students to learn. And what happens when you make schools like that, every room air conditioned, every place air conditioned, you're creating people who will eventually become policymakers because these are people with money. And to become a policymaker, you usually have to have money. It's privilege that gets you there, right? There are a few who struggle and get there, but mostly it's privilege. So if you have that kind of privilege, will you ever understand how 80% of the country lives? And you'll be making policy for them. So it's not just disabled people who get affected, it's the wider population that gets affected.
But besides, schooling, what else, parents lack when it comes to a support ecosystem to raise an autistic child?
Yeah.
In the country?
So whether it is school or whether parents, they have to spend a little bit of energy get themselves some training, because see, the autistic brain works very differently from the neurotypical brain, right? And that is something hard sometimes for parents to understand. Some parents, they manage to kind of figure it out and do a great job. But for a lot of parents, it is a little bit difficult. They don't quite know what they should be doing, right? And so ideally, parents should get themselves a little bit of a training. They could, unfortunately, the internet is full of a lot of great information and a lot of rubbish. So it's hard for parents to figure out which is the good information and which is rubbish, right? But if they could go to organizations like ours, there are others also. When people contact us from places like, say, Bangalore, for instance, or some other place, we refer them to good organizations there, right? So it's very important for parents to get access to information that will help them support their child. And schools as well. And I must say, there are a lot of, because we work with a lot of schools where we do trainings for them, trainings for their teachers, in helping them understand how they can support autistic people in the classroom. And in fact, the methods we suggest, like I said earlier, would help people with other learning disabilities as well, with other conditions. Because what we do is help them understand how to keep the communication very clear, which is very important for autistic people. Communication, no sarcasm, none of all of that. Very direct, clear, specific communication. Making the communication and whatever you're doing visually clear, providing predictability so that the child knows what is going to happen, not making sudden changes without warning, because autistic people have difficulty with transition. Many of us do, right? But for them, it is much more challenging. So doing these things and how to do them. So that is what parents need some guidance on, and schools do too, actually. And the trainings we do with mainstream schools is on this. What can they do to be able to include autistic people in their classrooms in a manner that they learn? Because a lot of schools, they have autistic kids in the classroom just there because the right to education access. So the focus is not on the education. They'll just sit there, have somebody mind them, and then when they're in the 7th or 8th class, now you take them out because they're not learning anything. That is really what is happening. That's the reality. But schools that really want to support them do come and get training so that they can do a good job of supporting autistic people. And mind you, there will always be some autistic kids who would, despite the school not supporting them, will manage to get through, right? Because maybe they have figured out, maybe they, first of all, maybe the learning styles are more typical, right? And some of them, they figure out how to, cope with the situations in the classroom. And maybe because sometimes the parents have figured it out and supported them.
Autism is a spectrum disorder, which means that two autistic children may have different symptoms.
Absolutely.
So how do we or spread awareness about that? Because we all think that all autistic children are the same, they'll exhibit same behavior, but it's not true, isn't it?
Yes. See, two autistic people will not have the same behaviors, but the behaviors are all manifestations of the same core differences in brain that they have from the neurotypical, right? So, of course, people may not, for most people, an autistic person is somebody who doesn't look you in the eye when she's speaking or they are speaking, right? Autistic people is someone who will have a lot of stimming, or somebody who does not speak at all. And that's not correct, right? But that is true of all disabilities, because you will have people who are blind who are totally blind, and there are people who are blind who are low vision, and they really have almost the same challenges as people who are totally blind. And people think, oh, because they're wearing glasses and they'll be able to move around, they don't have any difficulties. And that's not true. People with low vision, so what they see with the glasses is a faint shadow, and they're managing. So people think, oh, they don't have any difficulties. So this is the reality of all disabilities. I could have cerebral palsy, and I could have some difficulty in wearing my clothes, but otherwise I'm managing okay. I may have cerebral palsy, and one of my muscular challenges would be that I have very slurred speech. So people look at me and think, oh, intellectually to kuch nahi hai iska. I may have cerebral palsy and I may be in a wheelchair, but able to speak clearly, right? So every disability manifests differently. The thing with autism is, at first glance, physiologically, when you see the person, there doesn't seem to be any disability. It is when the person starts speaking and interacting that you see the differences, right? So in some people, there might be the person is doesn't want to speak. In another one, they might be able to do everything and just seem very eccentric and different, right? But the thing is that the way they interact with people would be different. Not all, there'll be some who would interact kind of okay. You wouldn't be able to make out, but they are doing everything to kind of manage and interact well. And they're having a major struggle inside, which we can't see. They're struggling to be able to interact, to not do anything that people would think that, oh, why are they so weird? Because they know people would judge them. So they're constantly, what the term used is masking. So they also have those difficulties. But they have figured that I can do these, but then it's extremely draining, right? And and then you will have people who will be flapping and jumping. Those are the ones that people will say that, oh, they're autistic right away. But there'll be many others who will be able to speak to you like anyone else, who would be, be able to interact like anyone else, but also have autism. And they are the ones who often have a lot more challenges. They have mental health issues because they're constantly trying to pretend to be something they are not. It's like it's a very stupid example to give, but it's like a blind person trying to pretend that I can see so that people will have to accept me. It's the same kind of challenge, right? So, yeah, but the other point that I want to make is that whether the person is flapping and jumping and non-speaking or somebody who's speaking much, that does not determine the intellectual ability, right? You could have somebody who's doing all kinds of stuff, but his mind is very clear, right? So people often judge from the way they see, and that happens with cerebral palsy also. If somebody's in a wheelchair, has very slurred speech, people presume that, they ye to kuch nahi kar sakte hain, right? And the same happens with autism as well. So if there is somebody who has a lot of stereotypical behaviors, right? People presume that there's not much intellectual ability in there. So that is a very important point to keep in mind, that one does not judge an individual from the outside. One should just presume that every individual has capacity and take it from there. And that's what schools have to do, because schools often make up an assumption that, oh, this kid can't learn, right? And parents do that also sometimes. Never make that assumption, because you do not know what is there in that child or that individual.
Yeah. So coming to that intellectual, abilities, then we must ensure that they find, place in workforce. And how do we ensure that?
See, the way to ensure it is by the workforce being willing to make the accommodations required for them. Just to draw a parallel, there was a time when women were considered stupid. They were not fit for the workforce. They couldn't do anything, right? And the reality is, women can do everything men can do. We are just physically, we may not have that strength, but not all women. There are women who are far more physically strong than many men, right? But otherwise, other than that, they can be anywhere, right? But women had to fight for years and years and years. And they're still fighting. They're still fighting. People presume that they will not be able to do well. And because people have this assumption, and we are in a very patriarchal society, we do know that there are women who do not get the promotions that they should get. right? That's a reality. They don't get the promotions that they should get. If there is a male colleague and a woman colleague with the same qualifications, the male who gets it. There are many studies, I'm not just saying it, there are many studies that have been done, right, that have shown this. It is the same with disability, right? I have to believe that, yes, this person, and if there is a woman in the workplace, you have to give that person leave when they have, if they're pregnant, for instance, they should get that leave. Now people have realized that men must also contribute to the family situation when there is a newborn, and men are also getting leave to look after the child, because why should the woman only have to look at? So it's about society changing its mind. That's what it is about, right? And we are too rigid and too stuck in the way we are. And when the government waves a whip, as happened, uh, about 20, 15, 20 years back, organizations started putting in ramps so that wheelchair users could go in, right? People fought like crazy because they didn't want to spend that extra money, because you'd have to spend maybe another 60, 70 lakhs to put a ramp and stuff like that. But now it's become a part of how it should be, so wheelchair users can go in. Similarly with blind people, people fought about not having them in the workplace and stuff like that, and now they've realized that, and they said okay, and they spend a lot on the software that makes it possible for a blind person to be able to contribute like anybody else. And they're brilliant blind lawyers and doctors and all kinds of stuff. Similarly with autistic people in the workforce, you have to make the accommodations. And for them, sometimes it's very simple things like giving visual, visual information rather than just verbally giving the information. Make the information visual, have it written down, right? So if you do that kind of stuff, don't make sudden changes in what the person has to do. That's an important thing for autistic people. If this is my responsibility, don't come tomorrow suddenly and say, okay, now from now today you have to do this. Tell them a few days in advance, right? They need that. That is what autistic people need. So, or making the work that they have to do very visual, right? So a lot of them, we have it written down for them so they know clearly what it is. And there are autistic people working everywhere. There are autistic journalists, there are autistic doctors, lawyers, there are all of them, they're out there. And for those who are very obviously autistic, many of them have joined workforces, and the companies oftentimes say that they are some of the best people that they have. Because you see, they don't go around gossiping and wasting time. Because for an autistic person, if this is what I have to do, I'm going to focus on this. I'm not going to do this, that, and the other. But that should not be the reason why companies should have them. Companies should have them because they make as good employees as anyone else. You just have to find the right fit and go with an understanding of, rights and willingness to make the accommodation that would be required to be able to work like anyone else.
In your experience, what are the key challenges faced by individuals with autism and their families in accessing healthcare in India? How are they treated in hospitals, doctors, radiologists? Have you ever come across stories and experiences? And being mother of an autistic child yourself, what have you gone through?
So, see, experiences are mixed, but a lot of them do have not very good experiences. Now, what happens is, mostly in the government hospitals where a large majority of our population go, they are looking at so many patients that they don't have the time. So that becomes one challenge because sometimes our kids need a little bit of time. The other thing, the wait is enormous and completely unpredictable, right? So even when you're going for say, a disability certificate to a government hospital, right? One doesn't know how long one has to wait. Sometimes the wait is for 2, 3 hours and you have no idea. And like I said, autistic people need a certain amount of predictability. So you have this kid with you. You don't know how long you're going to wait with him. There is absolute chaos in most government hospitals. So it's an extremely harrowing experience for not just the family, but for the individual. the autistic individual themselves. In addition to that, autistic people, they have a lot of sensory challenges. They are hypersensitive often to a lot of, uh, uh, um, to a lot of sensory input. So what might happen is that many of them are, say, for instance, extremely sensitive around the gums. So they find it very difficult to brush their teeth because it's painful. They brush, but they're not able to brush very well because it's very painful. So as a result, dental hygiene is not often very good. And many of them need dental care. But when you go for a dental appointment, it can sometimes be very challenging. So I remember when my son was very young, I had to take him for some dental work. So the dentist looked at him and then needed to do an X-ray and had to put a little, that X-ray thing in his mouth. And my son was finding it a little difficult. And because he flaps, people can see that he has a disability, right? And this is a very, very well-known hi-fi dentist. He said that, I can't do this. Please take him somewhere else, right? So, and then later when he was older, this is a dental thing. When he was older, there was this other dentist I went to who was absolutely amazing. He saw that my son was slightly different, and he said, "Look, you just sit there. I'll manage it." And he was so amazing with him that Neeraj did all whatever had to be done, prodded, poked, etc. And because the first experience was so positive, after that, my son has had root canals and implants and all kinds of stuff done, extractions. And what happens is that when the initial experience is good, it lays the basis of future experiences. For a lot of autistic people, the initial experience is really traumatic. So what ends up happening is that they don't want to have medical intervention. I remember once he needed to have an X-ray done, and I took him to the radiologist. And when you're doing a chest X-ray, they don't tell you. Now that you've done it many times, you know exactly what to do. But the first time when you go, they tell you stand there. So you stand. They said, put your chin over there. Like, why don't you know that you should put it there? That's the tone. So you do this. They say, hold this. So the tone very often is such, and it's very confusing for our kids because they don't understand why it's getting so difficult. All you have to do is tell them, stand there, put your chin on that, hold it like this. Some places do that, but not all. So the place where he'd gone to, and then he was having a bit of difficulty because that thing was cold, and he has a lot of tactile sensory issues. So he was taking a bit of time. And the radiologist said, I can't do X-ray for this boy. Take him somewhere else. And I actually had to leave. I hadn't become that militant at that time. He was a young kid. And I had to go. I didn't get the X-ray from that place. Right? So this is my experience is a very common experience. Lot of kids have a lot of difficulties with many doctors. Of course, nowadays there are many more doctors who are very kind and who really try to help because the understanding is greater. So things have changed. They are changing, but that is there. But one important thing is that as far as medical treatment is concerned, most disabled people cannot have insurance because insurance companies won't give them insurance, right? So imagine the expense is always there. And of course, autistic people can get insurance under the National Trust, Niramaya scheme. It's a small amount, but it is there. But if there is any major hospitalization that happens, they don't have access to insurance, not as yet. There is talk going on with the IRDI, but it's still at the stage of talks.
Technology plays a significant role. It can play a significant role in, supporting
Yes.
individuals with autism. What advancements or initiatives you have observed in India that can harness technology for the benefit of the community?
Right. First of all, before I say what I'm going to say, I want to say this that there is this currently this very strong thing. Technology is the answer to everything. It is not. Technology is not the answer to everything. You want a research grant, it has to be something to do with technology. Technology is not going to fix autism. Technology is not going to cure autism. Autism cannot be cured, it cannot be fixed. I cannot stop being a Bengali, or you cannot stop being whatever you are by some machine put into my head. I will continue being what I am. So technology is great. It makes life easy, but it is not the answer to everything. Because nowadays I find in India, for everything, there is this thing of how will technology fix this? It won't, right? But yes, technology has a big role to play. Particularly, there are certain learning tools, but there is this thing that all learning tools, you just put these apps in and everything, they learn everything. That doesn't always happen, right? And it's not that everybody is very willing to use technology. Not autistic people enjoy technology, just like all neurotypical people do not enjoy technology. We may use our mobile phones and stuff like that, but not every neurotypical person adores technology. So we should not make that assumption that all autistic people love technology. I know lots who don't, right? But one area where technology can play a big role is, of course, yes, technology. You can use your phones to have your schedule for the day. You can have your phone that tells you, it gives you reminders, because they need that kind. Just like I need my planner all the time. So a lot of autistic people need planners. So your mobile phones can provide you with those tools that you can use as reminders, planners, all that kind of stuff. So that's brilliant. But the other where technology can be useful for autistic people is in communication. So there is this understanding that is took some time to come in, but is there that autistic people, just because they are not speaking, does not mean that they not have anything to say. They do, right? It's just that they do not speak to communicate. And for a long time, there was a lot of focus on using signs to teach them to communicate, or using cards, picture exchange system, to have them communicate, which a lot of people use. A lot of a community still uses that. But there are also now apps that people can use for communication, right? There is, in India, you have the Avas. There is the Prolocute that we use, which is a international, I think it's an American app, right? So these are apps that a lot of autistic people are now using to communicate, right? And some of them are picture to speech software, some of them are text to speech software, right? And there are autistic people who just use communicators, which are text to speech. They type out and the words speak for them, right? So that is one area where technology can play a very big role, but it's expensive. So not every family in India can afford a tablet, or the cost of renewing that app periodically. And see, we as an organization, we don't work with a very affluent community. We work with a mix, people, middle class, as well as people who have more financial constraints. So these are great tools, but not everybody can afford it. And you need to have the technology to test it out with your individual to see whether it is something that they would want to use. But to do that, you have to first get the tablet, you have to get the software, and then you might find your child doesn't want to use it, right? And then it becomes difficult for a lot of families. But so it'd be great if some of this became cheaper. It's like, the Prolocute can only be used on an iPad or an iPhone. Now, for a lot of Indians, an iPad is not something that you can afford, right? A regular tablet is still manageable, but an iPad is very expensive. Ours is great. It's still evolving. And I'm sure the makers are going to make it much more effective in time. But that is something that a lot of people are using. So that is one area where technology can play a very big role in the autistic community. But of course, in addition to that, like I said, tablets for reminders, for schedules, for what I'm supposed to do, all of that are very, very useful. And there are some learning materials that are also useful to use on tablets and stuff like that. But Some of them are often, like promoted as, something that will just teach autistic kids everything, which is not correct, which is not true.
Thank you so much for sharing these great insights with us. It was lovely chatting with you and grateful for your time, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shailaja. Lovely talking to you too.
Thank you,
Have
ma'am.
a lovely day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.